Okay, everyone. So this is the first video, obviously, of 2021. My goal with these videos is, I think, it's easy to look at a finished script and have a couple things happen. One is to have no idea what is going on, how that script was written, and what each part does. And I think if you can kind of follow the process of it being written, it's a lot easier to understand what each function does or each class. And that makes it a lot easier to figure out how you may have written it differently, or because everyone thinks a little bit differently, names variables a little differently, uses different tools. I think I prefer to use lists a lot more than other people do. I certainly prefer classes a lot more than other people do. So that's one goal. And the other goal is, if you're really new to coding, I think it's easy to think that people just sit down and write a script. And my goal with this, you can see that I have the browser window open and my coding window, VS Code. And I think this is probably a pretty common setup, at least for anyone I know, where you're going to constantly be Googling stuff. Oh, how does this class work again? How does this function work? How do you find the largest item in a list? Whatever it is. And I want you to see all the stupid mistakes I make. So I just thought it'd be useful to record my process. And you obviously don't need to watch these by any means, but if you're totally new and totally stuck, these will be easier to follow along, I think, than just looking at people's scripts. So that's my goal with these. If you know what you're doing already, you probably won't get much out of these, aside from being able to make fun of me. So on the left here, I have my browser window. It's open to Advent of Code already, and I'm already signed in to my GitHub account, which I would say everyone should make for this challenge, certainly, and just generally as well. And then on the right, I have VS Code, which I forgot I meant to zoom in some so that you can see. Well, we'll see once I start typing. Let's see. Probably that's a good size. Yeah. Let's just trust that it is. Well, let's do one smaller. So obviously, normally I'd keep my text editor much smaller, but I want you to be able to see. So the other thing is, I'm going to be working in Python, which if you just go to Python, I think .org, yeah, you can download Python 3.10. I actually don't know what version I'm using. Let's see. The nice thing, oh wow, well, maybe I'll do that later. The nice thing about Python is it's not a compiled language, so it's much faster to write and test your code. So with all that out of the way, let's take a look at the first challenge. So I see he doesn't have a width set. It's standard, so this is as zoomed in as we can be. So I'm not going to read you the story. Let's just read it separately. Okay, so it seems that basically for this first part of this puzzle, we have a list of numbers, and we want to know how many times the number increases. And there's two different ways you could do that, right? You could say, when is the next number greater and when is the last number smaller? And it seems, according to this puzzle, because it wants the first item to have a kind of no answer, not applicable. It wants to know how many times was the last number smaller. So the first thing we have to do is get our puzzle input, which, like we saw, is just a huge list of numbers. So obviously something it would take forever to do by hand, which I suppose is kind of the point. I am going to save this in my Advent of Code repo, day1, input.txt. Okay, so the first thing to do is get the list of numbers, which should be relatively easy. So numbers equals, or well, let's. I like to stay in the fiction, so let's say depths equals the list of x for x in open input.txt. And of course, I forgot to make it a string now that people are watching me. The other thing to do here is we need x to be an integer, and we also, I think actually with integer you don't have to, but it's good practice to, in files like text files, when you're reading them, they have a new line at the end that you have to remove for most cases. So int will do that automatically. It'll just strip out that new line, but rstrip deletes all the white space at the end of a string that you read into it. So I just do that when I'm reading from a file, just so I don't have to think about the new lines. So now depths is a list in Python of, and this is called a list comprehension, by the way, if you want to Google it. Basically, the way it works is you have, here's what I want to do to each item, and then for x, which tells Python what in your string in this command is the item. So in our case, it's x. So you say for x in, and then what is the list. So you can use a list you've already made. You can generate a list here. So if I had put like range 1 to 10, it would just make the list of the range 1 to 10, which would be kind of a waste of a list comprehension. But okay. So now we've got the list of depths. So we just need to figure out when do they increase. And as tempting as it is to find some kind of fancy way to do this, I think for the sake of understandability for new coders, I'll keep it really simple. So I'll say for depth in depths, actually for index, oh, I guess the sun just rose. Depth in depths. Enumerate. Well, let's do for index in range depths. Len depths. So this is just going to give us, it's going to count from 0 to the highest, the last item that we have in depths, the index of the last item, right? So then we can just say if, so well, you'll see why in a second, but we need try if depths index minus 1 is less than depths index. Let's say increase 0, and then increase plus equals 1. So if the last depths was smaller than this depths, we count that as an increase. Else, we don't need an else because we don't have to do anything if it was a decrease. And then except index error, which is just the first one won't have an index minus 1, so you can just say continue, which says try the next iteration of the loop. And then at the end, we can just print increase. So let's give that a try. Python 1.py 1766. Great, got the right answer. That would have been embarrassing if I fucked up part 1, day 1. Now I'm trying to teach people. Okay. So now it wants us to, let's just mark this as part 1. So now it wants us to consider a 3-measurement sliding window. So blah blah blah. So this is something that I probably would do. Okay, so the part 2 of the challenge is, instead of just comparing, this measurement with the last measurement, it wants us to basically take the sum of the 3 measurements, which is the same as taking a rolling average, but without dividing. So just take the sum of, for instance here, measurement ABC. So 199, 200, and 208. I don't know why I'm pointing with my finger. And then compare them to the sum of 200, 208, and 210. So basically, for every index, compare the sum of that index and the next 2 with the sum of the next 3 indices, not the current one. So that should not be very difficult. I think you could even do that just with list comprehension. But again, let's keep it simple. So part 2, I'm going to say increase is 0 again, and then for I in range, then depths. It's basically we're doing the same thing again, right? But we're just going to do sorry, brain fart. We're just going to do 3 instead of just comparing these 2 indices. And rather than recalculate the sum every time, which in this case would take an imperceptible amount of time, but I'm going to store the previous sum. So the first thing to do is set the okay, so first we're going to calculate the current, right? Because it wants to say is your current greater than your previous. So the 0 should have no previous sum. So cur sum equals sum depths I to I plus 3, and that'll give us I. So you would think, naively, you want I plus 1, and I plus 2, but in Python it's inclusive on the left side of the range and exclusive on the right side of the range. So you want I plus 3, I think. We'll see. So that'll give us our sum, and then and then previous sum. If cur sum greater than prev sum increase plus equals 1, and then we can accept an index error. And okay, so we're going to get index errors on two ends. On the very first one, we'll get an index error. Oh, we won't get an index error. So here we need to do if I equals 0, previous sum equals sum depths I plus 3. So this sets the previous sum, and then I just continue. And then down here, what I will want to do is prev sum equals cur sum. So what I'm doing now is now this kind of the main loop where we don't have to worry about the try and except for right now. If it's the very first time we do it, I'm going to set I'm just going to set the previous sum because we're going to continue to the next loop immediately with this continue statement because there is no previous sum. Otherwise, we'll take the current sum, which is the sum of the current index plus the next 2, and then if the current sum is greater than the previous sum, we'll count that as an increase, and then we set the previous sum to the current sum, which means for the next loop we've saved our previous sum. And that way we're not calculating 2 sums for every loop, we're just calculating 1. And then over here, when we have the index error, that's when we're at the end this time of the list because there's no next sums to look at. So we can just say continue. Actually, we could just say break, which ends the loop because we know there's no more interesting stuff. It even tells us stop when there aren't enough measurements left to create a new 3-measurement sum. So that's exactly what this does. When we have an index error, which means we've run out of plus 1s, plus 2s, plus 3s, probably the plus 3s will happen first, we're going to break the for loop. So with all of this, I believe we can just print increase again and run it. So we have a slightly different number, 1797. We got it right. So that's it. That's day 1, pretty easy. Again, I think we probably could have done certainly could have done the first half with a list comprehension in 1 line, and the second half maybe, but I probably would have tended toward this approach anyway, just because you want to be able to come back to these things and know what the hell you did. So that's it. We got our 2 stars for day 1, and tomorrow will be day 2, and then we'll actually be able to meet and talk about make sure everyone's set up and things are going well. So that's it.